Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk TV. Lively talk about life, church, and church life. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney-Britton, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Dr. Kris Tenney-Britton, and we're broadcasting from our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of America. Say good morning, Kris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk TV.
Kris and Bill Tenney-Britton here to talk about the great worship juggling act, and I really wanted to bring in juggling balls, but I used to be able to do it, but not so much anymore. I've lost my coordination. Okay. Once upon a time, way back in the day. Hey, what we're talking about is understanding generational dynamics in worship. In other words, how do you appease everybody in a multi-generational congregation in a worship service, in a worship setting? And I'll give you a hint. No, it isn't going to happen.
Wasn't it P.T. Barnum who said you can't please all the people all the time?
I don't know.
I'm going to give it to him because I'm just thinking juggling and circus acts.
Yeah, okay. I think it's what is it? You can fool so many people some of the time and whatever. Okay, anyway. Yeah.
But we're not going to fool you today, right? Okay.
That's
so
right.
anyways.
Generational dynamics.
Yes. One of the best exercises that we had to do along the way was to determine where were we bringing people in, what were our front doors, and then where were we trying to get them when they came to church, right? What was the pathway to get to where we wanted them?
How do we get them from out there into discipleship?
Well, today we'd say discipleship, but it wasn't always discipleship.
No.
It used to be worship.
Yeah,
honestly, I mean, that's when we were first doing it.
The goal was Sunday school, let's be honest. That was kind
I don't know. That wasn't where I wanted my folk. I wanted
me
them
neither,
in worship, right?
Okay, yeah.
So maybe Sunday. I don't know. Anyways, so worship is big. Worship is one of the ways we bring people in. It's one of the ways people can connect, although please don't put all the eggs in your basket. We're just being metaphorical today, aren't we? Don't put all the your eggs into the basket of worship, your spiritual basket. That's falling apart.
Unless it's Easter. Sorry. Sorry, couldn't help it.
My metaphor was messed up to begin with. Anyways, people probably are not going to be converted in your worship service, right? I mean,
that's not the point of the worship service.
Right, you can't, like in a 5-minute message or a 20-minute message
or a 40-minute,
45-minute message, you're not able to feed people what they need for a spiritual change. Anyways, because it's not just about feeding or food, right? It's about
inspiration, but we'll go there on another day.
Okay, another topic. Okay, so anyways, worship is one of the ways we bring people into the church, and for many of us,
it's still a front door.
It's still a front door, yes. And for many of us, it's where we want people to get to.
Land,
we want them to be there in worship, but that makes the worship service critically important, but even more difficult to navigate.
Yeah,
right?
It really does.
And why we need to know our avatar.
Right. Well, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
I mean, we've talked about our avatar, and I think it was a couple of episodes ago that we talked very specifically about avatars. And so who you're trying to reach.
Your target audience.
Your avatars, I would suppose you could say, that's how you're going to style your worship to reach them.
Your avatar-y? Sorry.
Avatar-y, sorry. You're really on a roll today.
Here's the deal. Once upon a time, we lived in a land in which everyone knew the story, and when you invited them to church, they either said yeah or no, but they knew the stories. And so what happened in the worship, what happened in the sermon and all that was kind of, it was important, don't get me wrong, but it was a part of the culture. And today, we have at least 2 generations that were not raised in the church. Yeah. And so if we invite them to worship, they're like, what is this? And it for most of them, it's anachronous. It seems like it's irrelevant, out of date, out of time. The technology's backwards, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to talk really. And we really are. We're not talking about your existing congregation who were raised in the church.
No.
That's okay. People who were raised in the church, they're kind of used to traditional or contemporary or whatever, and they have their preferences, but they're okay with it all. Right. We're talking about people who were either new Christians or people who are outside the church that we're trying to bring into the church and bring into the faith via the worship service. And how do we bridge the gaps between the generations? Because someone who's a baby boomer, who is outside the church, hasn't been in church probably since they were, a kid, what they expect and what will speak to them is very different from the 22-year-old who just graduated from college, the Gen Z kid who shows up to your worship service. The needs are incredibly different, and the expectations on how we communicate to them, how we make them feel welcome, is very different. So that's really what we're talking about, and it is about juggling, because the reality, folks, we're talking about one of the most difficult things that you will face in your church.
It's true. Worship wars. I mean, we're still fighting worship wars, and let's be real. It used to be about technology. We're going to say more about technology in a moment,
music,
right?
Though.
Well, I know. I was going there next.
Right.
Okay, there's music. There's the screen. What songs are you going to sing? What not? How long the minister's sermon is. That's another big whatever. Oh my gosh.
20 minutes, you're done, Pastor.
Oh my gosh, the first time I ever preached, I had no idea, about timing or anything, and I had handwritten all my notes, and there was a trustee in the back of the church going like this and pointing at the clock over the door, which I had no idea there was ever a clock over the door, and yeah, it was not good. But a 20-minute sermon, or then it got to 10-minute sermon, and some of us preach 30 or 40-minute sermons. That's what needs to be said.
Right.
Okay, anyways,
all right, so let's move
we
on.
want to talk a little bit about the generations and characteristics that go with them, their worship preferences that are there.
And not just, it goes beyond the worship preferences to the cultural preferences. Okay,
right.
So for instance, and I think this is where we're going to come and go, I want to talk about learning styles.
Okay.
How do you get information, which, that's what worship is about.
Right.
There's the expressive part. But generally speaking, when we talk about worship and we're talking about all this, one of the things, we got the emotional piece, the great music and all that, but then we got the sermon. And how do we convey the gospel in a way that is relevant and appropriate and appropriatable from the generations? And the problem is that that's very different. The oldest generation still living is called the silent generation.
Boy, and they're like, what, 100 right at late 90s?
They're in their 90s.
Yeah.
And the silent generation, and they were raised, like my dad was raised, he didn't have it. He wasn't raised with television. He got his information by sticking his ear next to the radio, and his entertainment came from the radio, or he read a book. And so it was all oral. It all came, talk, a lecture. That lecture were very important in a part of it. So a sermon was oral. I mean, that's how you heard it. You went, they spoke, you listened, and that's how it was. And it was a norm, and that's how people learned. They learned through reading, they learned through speaking. If you go to most churches today, that's still the main learning style.
Well, it just struck me as I'm sitting here thinking, like one of our very dear friends, whose name I'm not going to use on the air, he was taught at Yale. He was taught preaching at Yale by who? A silent generation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So his preaching, and I can tell you, there are a few others who, Will Willimon is another one of those, right, who was taught preaching, who today is still producing materials, preaching materials, and his training came from
his lecture.
The silent.
Right.
Yeah, it came from the silent.
Lecture.
And so we're still seeing it, right? Because people are still using those materials, those lectionary materials.
Right. Well, not less lectionary, but it's that lectionary is kind of secondary piece here. But there's still.
I know. I'm not. Right, I'm just saying how they're accessing
lecture.
it.
They're still lecturing.
Right. I get that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So there's still. If you close your eyes in most worship services and never opened them, and you could stay awake,
sure,
you wouldn't miss anything.
Probably not.
You wouldn't miss anything, okay? And that's the key of the silent generation. Then you get us.
Well, you might. What you'd get is some gee whiz kind of information. It's like a lecture, so you can walk away with something.
Right. I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying that you don't need to see. It's all oral.
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
right. It's all oral.
That's right.
I can stick my ear next to the radio.
Right.
And I get everything.
Right. I got you.
Okay? Right.
I'm totally there.
So that's the silent generation, and that's how they learn. Baby boomers, Not so much. Now it's still important. We were readers. We were able to listen to a lecture and appropriate it, but we began to really gravitate towards image driven. You know, Life magazine and those magazines really took off. And we started seeing. Actually, we watched film strips. And we watched movies in classrooms in Super 8 movies, not Super 8, they were 8mm. And we began, television became into its fore, and we began learning through images. Imagery was very important for the baby boomers. And the reality is, in most baby boomer driven services, there's still a lot of the oral, because we have a history of that, a tradition of that,
right.
But there's a lot more imagery. If they have screens, and most baby boomer churches have screens now, not all, but most, there's screen technology, and there's pictures, or here's what often is the case, they put the words up on top, so it might as well be a book. And there's very little imagery, but we learn through imagery, okay? That's the baby boomers. Then comes Gen X.
I'm a Gen X.
So you want to run with this one?
Yeah, so Gen X really takes that, well, let's just think MTV, right? I mean, so you take from images, and it is we're in the Christmas time. So I was thinking of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and just how kind of simplistic all that is, right? When you watch Rudolph, the Somebody Bass, Rudolph, Clarice, and everybody's in there. When you watch Rudolph fly or whatever run, it's kind of like clip clop, clip clop, clip clop. So it's kind of like that. It's very almost
stop action.
Yeah. So I mean, but that's the kind of imagery, right, that boomers grow up with. But now we're talking about MTV imagery, movement, and we gear into that, right? It's not just about listening to the music, because we grew up with radios and everything, transistor radios, boom boxes. But wow, MTV was a big deal.
Right, and the Gen X is video driven.
That's right.
They're a video driven generation. They learn best via video. They get a lot of their information from video sources.
Yeah, I wanted to say this. So I have several friends who are, well into their 70s now, right? So definitely boomers. And when they preach, or we're talking, they're using examples, they're talking about stories, books, and poetry. I just don't have that piece. My examples are almost always movies. They're stories and movies. And it struck me one day, wow, and they'll say, you know a lot about movies. And it's like, why? Because I've got more, that's a whole different set than what they have.
Then there's our kids. The millennials,
kids,
okay?
Yep, there they are.
They're no longer the young adults. They're 25 years old and go up to
40.
Yeah, right. So the millennials are in their 40s. You want to feel old there, baby boomers? Anyway, here's the deal. Millennials Gen X had, don't get me wrong, Gen X had the computer, okay? But it was kind of in its infancy, and if they were smart and they invested in, Microsoft and whatnot, they're multimillionaires now. But wow, that'll do it.
Wow, that was like a Gen Z moment.
That was a Gen. That's right. Hello,
that's hilarious.
My phone is going off. All right. Dick Tracy. Now I've dated myself.
Wow, I think that was like a case.
Anyway, so Gen X had computers, but millennials, they were raised with computers. They were raised with computer technology, and the internet is not just their friend. The internet is who they are, kind of.
Yeah.
They identify with that. They're native. They're native technology, and there is a lot of interactivity, but not nearly as much as when we get to Gen Z.
Yeah.
Because Gen Zs, if the millennials are on their computers and they're on their phones, don't get me wrong, they're on their phones, but they're the digital generation. Gen Z is kind of the phone generation. They are so connected to each other electronically, digitally, I should say, that it's just they learn best. Millennials to a certain extent, but they learn best in interactivity. Now, let's talk about silent generation. Listen carefully. To Gen Z, we need interactivity, and we have some dissonance when we try to pull worship together.
Well, dissonance. And I'm thinking over here with our grandsons, right? Continually having conversations, and our youngest will be 13 this weekend, and he can have a conversation with me and with 5 other people at the same time on his computer. So talk about juggling. What did I say? His computer. Yeah, forget the computer. It's cell phone. Even though he's got an iPad,
he stays on his cell phone. The cell phone is his way.
Right,
now,
exactly.
Here's the deal, is that here's all these various ways of communication and learning. That's just a learning style. There is so much that is so different in so many different ways. I'm not the only one who got a phone going off.
But I can't talk.
You can't talk on your phone, your watch. I mean, anyway, there's learning styles. There's preferences, there's music styles, it goes on and on and on, and all of this has to be taken into consideration when it comes to putting together a worship service that is going to reach. How do you reach a multi-generational target, our audience? It's really, really difficult. In fact, that's why we talk about targeting is so critically important, and that every church needs to have 2 targets. They have their churched people, that's one target, regardless of the generation. Again, they'll put up with, they're used to all this various different, discordant type of learning styles and preferences and whatnot. But those who, if you're the second target is reaching out to those outside your community. Who can you reach? Probably not going to be getting too busy reaching the silent generation, but there are churches still that say, we're trying to reach baby boomers. And that's great. It's whatever your target audience is.
Right, exactly. Be real about it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Be real about it. And because if you've decided you're reaching baby boomers, then you're also deciding you're probably not going to reach Gen Z. With that, now don't get me wrong, they'd be welcome. They're welcome to come. If someone isn't welcome to your church, you're not a church, you're a club. Stop calling yourself a church. But if you target and create worship for baby boomers, you are saying to your Gen Z people who need interactivity that, probably not. How many churches, we just talked about this earlier, you go into churches, we still go to churches where they say, please silence your cell phone turn off your cell phones.
Right.
You can't say that to Gen Z. In fact, to Gen Z, and actually millennials, you have to say, or you need to say, take out your phones and we need you to text someone or look up something or share or give, you said.
Right, I shudder. I shudder every time I hear those words. Turn off your cell phones. Take it off. I really just, bugs me, and it bugs me because I am just looking across the congregation, the people who've gathered that day, going, oh my gosh, how many people have you just offended? Right, and you've just really chased off in so many respects, or you've said, wow, you don't really fit here.
Right.
You're not us. You never will be.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we want to encourage for the younger generations.
Right.
We want to encourage them to be talking about what's going on in worship service on their Instagram account, on their Snapchat account, on TikTok,
Take video. I mean,
exactly.
When something's funny's happening or whatever, you'll see them up there while their kids are singing, whatever it may be, or their sibling or their parents who are doing something they shouldn't be. Anyways, they'll do it. And if you've got a worship service that they're engaging, in fact, wow, what a compliment, hopefully, to have them videotaping in the worship service or taking pictures.
Because everyone uses videotape these days.
Whatever you call it, videoing, running video. Right.
Live streaming.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Not all of us live stream.
Baby boomer. All right. Hey, we don't have a lot of time, and I want to give you some solutions.
Really?
We want to talk about how to target the generations.
Okay.
And first thing is folks, you got to target. That's just how it is. Choose who you can best reach, because you can't reach everyone. It just isn't possible.
I want to say this.
Yep.
I just had a conversation with the pastor the other day who has somebody in his church who doesn't want to do an avatar. And the reason was, well, we're a small church. We're just a small church. It's like, well, you know what? If you're just a small church, you're always just going to be small, except you'll be dead. And,
look around the congregation and figure out how many people will not be there in 10 years.
We can talk about your trajectory, right?
Yep.
And then the person said, wow, this is going to take a lot of work. So remember that that we can't is often we won't, and get clear about that. Well, we aren't going to do it, or we can't do it, and can't, never will. So you've got a target. And this really does come down to that avatar. And right now, we've had different things that are really important to us and we want to get across. Right now, avatars are huge. Please, please, please create your avatar.
And the reality is why it's so important now is because churches are becoming more and more irrelevant to the community. And we've to be perfectly honest, since we were kids, we saw the church beginning to go in that direction where it became less and less relevant to the community.
Right.
But this post-COVID world, it has really come to a point where, folks, we have to do what it takes to grow the church. Targeting is critical. And so let us talk about, us want to talk about 4 different ways that are important for targeting the generation. So whoever you're trying to choose, first thing up is the message. And when I say the message, I mean the sermon. Which I really prefer calling it a message. I called it conversation in my last church.
I'm not comfortable with that.
I like the conversation. But anyway, but the message, the sermon has a lot of baggage out in the public. So find something, whatever you call it.
Sermon, message, whichever.
Here's the key. Everyone has problems. Everyone has aspirations. And they tend to be somewhat generational within reason, and they tend to be, absolutely, if you work with an avatar, you go find a representative of that avatar out in the community or someone's, and you have conversations with them. And you want to find out 2 things. You want to, number 1, find out what it is that's keeping them up at night. What are they worried about? And number 2, what are their aspirations? What are their dreams? What are they trying to accomplish? And then you create messages, sermon series, and events, not just sermon series, but events that will solve the problems and help them reach their aspirations. Now, here's the thing. Jesus promised a full and abundant life, pure and simple. And he didn't mean that it would be a full and abundant devotional life and everything else would be No, it's a full and abundant life. That doesn't mean you'd be wealthy, doesn't mean you'd be healthy, doesn't mean you'd live a problem-free life. What it meant is you would have a purpose, you would have fabulous relationships, and you'd be dealing with the ones that didn't. And when it comes to finances, we wouldn't be drowning in debt if we used biblical principles just for one. That there would be a living to be made, and etc. So that said, go ahead.
No, I'm watching time. So I mean that being said, that there are different messages, but there are some themes I will say that cross children, grandchildren. So little ones.
That's the brilliance of all this,
crossing, right? So you can do that, and we haven't said this yet, but I'll just jump to this place. Is to say that you can do better it's easier to reach 2 generations that are next to one another than to skip a generation.
It's almost impossible to reach a generation.
Right,
targeting.
Exactly. So, when you're talking about something, if you want to reach the silent generation, and what I hear out there is that, well, we want to keep this, or it's not even about keeping our silent generation. It's about having a worship service for them as long as they can still come to church. So, we're trying to reach them where more than likely they're going to keep coming. And there aren't that many of them that on their own volition are going to come, right? So now we're really looking at boomers and Gen X. It's tough to have a service or create a message necessarily that's going to reach boomers and millennials. 2 different pieces, unless it is about
there's some
children,
things.
Right? There's children, spirituality, right? The spiritual piece, how to deal with tough relatives,
marriage,
okay,
family relationships, children, money,
disillusionment,
and meaning.
Those
are the 4 biggies that cross all generations. Okay? And so if you're talking and creating a message that is relevant to a baby boomer and you're talking about how to make your marriage work, because baby boomers their divorce rate has gone up again.
Right.
Or if you are talking about how to deal with being single again, or being widowed, as the case may be, you're all by yourself. That does translate across the line. Okay, now you may be talking here in your target, but we're not saying you're not relevant across.
Right.
But you are talking, creating themes that hit that target avatar, whoever that is. Okay, we've got to hit the other.
Well, and most people, unless they're disillusioned, okay, if you've got people that bring conflict stuff with them, or you're in a congregation with conflict, you may hear, well, that message isn't reaching me, or some other complaint like that, right? But most people who come in, as long as they're hearing something that's relevant, and not necessarily relevant for them, but relevant for their child
for
or
someone,
something, right?
Someone they know.
Then they're going to be more in tune or attuned to.
They're more likely to show up again.
Right, again,
okay?
right. Yeah, because the church cares about someone that I care about.
And it's real life.
Yes.
And it's relevant.
Right.
And it is transformational.
Right.
Okay, so.
Okay.
All right, moving on. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to say something about technology.
Good, great, yep.
If you don't have a screen, get a dad blasted screen.
Get over it.
Okay, that's the bottom line. It's just a given. Like we said, worship wars used to be about whether or not to have a screen. Get a screen. Your older folks, they're going to be thankful. Maybe not up front. They may complain about the money, so that's probably another issue going on. But if you've got money socked away, or that list in your back pocket, so someone says, I want to donate $1,000, $2,000 to your church, how would you use that money if I were to give it to you? You could say, a screen. We need screen technology. And the wonderful part about your older folk is that they can see so much better the words that are up on the screen than they are in your pocket.
Right.
So you can start slowly.
In their hymnal.
Oh, in their pocket. I'm stuck on that, in your pocket money, and the sermon in your pocket, and all that other stuff. So now, for your boomers, especially, and silent gen out there, they're going to prefer the words and maybe some background, maybe. Where your younger people, you're going to need a bit more, and be sure that you bring in some movie examples, right? That you're drawing on images. And you can learn a lot more video. Right. Yeah, that's what I meant. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay.
But beyond that, technology also includes, I want to say, we already touched on the cell phone thing. Live with that. Please. Don't make them put them away. Practice it right. Get your cell phone out and send this. We ask this question to someone you know who's unchurched. Why don't you like church? Or what do you think is the meaning of life? Yeah, or whatever.
What would it take for you to come to church with me next week? I had kids ask that, or people, not just kids, ask that one morning, and we were getting answers back, and you see kids there, and I'm like, is anybody getting answers? And now we've got some conversation about,
which
hey,
brings
try
the
this,
interactivity.
see what that, right? Yeah, exactly.
Right,
We're having a blast. Okay.
All right.
Hospitality.
Hospitality, and just a word about hospitality. Hospitality is generational. My mom and my dad, they drank coffee, and they drank the out of the big 3-pound cans of coffee. And when my mom made coffee, it was not even the color of good tea. It was very. Here's the deal: is the younger you are, the more important your coffee is, and that it's green sourced.
That's right.
Trade friendly, and that it is dark. And bold, which, my generation, once upon a time, we called that bitter.
Well, even better, lattes. If you've got, is it a barista in there working, is great. If I can jump in, because I know we're doing time here. Oh, no, we're out. Is that hospitality used to be down in the fellowship hall. You had to make sure you had cookies and all that other stuff, because God forbid that you'd have coffee. You couldn't have coffee up front because they might take it into the sanctuary, and there are still a lot of churches that do that.
Which is craziness.
Yeah. Well, okay. Anyways, but for our younger people, hospitality, it's everywhere. So you have a coffee station or a tea station if you really want to make bonus points. You've got that barista or 2 or 3 there. Right.
And the snacks, etc. Everything is about what does this generation look for, And so hospitality is also generational. The last thing we want to touch on is music. Yeah. Everyone used to put music at the very top of the list. that if you had a rock and roll service or a country service or whatever it was, that's how you grew your church.
Yeah, it
is
was all about
you hit the generations with their music.
Right.
Nobody last Sunday woke up and said, "Man, if it was my kind of music, I'd go to church."
I'm at a concert.
That worked in
At
the
9
'70s and
a.m.
the '80s, but not so much anymore. The build it and you will come, they will come is just not there anymore. So here's the reality: is music is important. It's still,
Right.
we're not saying
and
it's
there
not
are
important.
churches that can pull it off, and it is an amazing, amazing production. I don't mean that in an ugly way.
Right.
What they do is absolutely amazing.
But here's the thing again: is that
Right.
whether that music on those churches
Right.
is targeted.
Right, I
They've
understand
targeted.
that totally.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there are places that have amazing music.
Right, absolutely.
Right, and I don't want to leave them out.
Right. But what I'm saying is, whatever music you have, whatever music you can pull off with whatever level of excellence, anymore when you start reaching out, people will overlook the music.
Yes.
They'll overlook your liturgy. They'll look what they will not overlook is your technology,
Right,
your hospitality,
right,
and your message.
right.
And not in that order. Really, number one is that message had better be spot on, relevant,
Right.
and life applicable.
Right.
You know, that had better be there. Hospitality is number two. No one's going back to a church that ignored them,
Right.
etc. Technology is actually third on the list, and music's last. As you grow the church, and with whatever your target audience is, eventually that music will have to change because they'll become more and more, not the majority, but they become more and more the driving force behind the church, and then the music will change. But you don't have to do it to begin with.
Right, okay, two more last
Yeah.
things from me. One is, you don't have to be the best preacher in the world. I think I said this
Oh,
the
right.
last couple
You
of
just have
3
to be
weeks,
relevant.
right? You've got to be relevant, you've got to have a good message, one that's going to touch hearts and change lives, okay? So,
And you need a call to action.
thank you. Isn't that the huge thing for us? Like when we hear the lectures and
Right.
whatever, it's like, where's the so what? Who cares?
Right.
Right, exactly.
Go home and think about it.
Right. So
That doesn't change lives.
no. So that's one. The other is about the music. Carol McCauley is the one who taught me this. Carol McCauley is an incredible minister, and she was on my staff as music minister a number of years ago now. And she said, when we sing, when we choose the music, we want to go from singing about God to singing to God to singing for God. That people come in and many of them are not going to have any idea who God or Jesus is. So we're going to sing about God so that they can hear, this is why we're here basically. So we're singing about God. And then from there, you can move into the music to God. And then the for God is kind of like, I'm going to go out and do a commitment, right? It's that commitment song. So think about that, as you're looking at music. About God, to God, for God.
All right. Hey, we are like way out of time.
Over time.
We will see you next week. Thanks for joining us.
And have a great week. Bye-bye.